Alright, Thrill Seekers, that was a little bit of Time Machine ni Onegai by Sadistic Mika Band. And I'm still in Japan, and I don't know if I've put any videos up, because actually I'm not really in Japan, I'm in California, but I'm making this in preparation for going to Japan, and so I'm making sure I got a couple of videos to go up, even if I don't do any videos while I'm in Japan. So today's video is a little clip from September of 2022 in Bonn, Germany, and it's me talking about Primordial Ignorance. So I thought you might enjoy that. And if you want to contribute to me doing things and going to Japan, well, actually, the going to Japan thing is, that's separate money. That's not money you gave me. That's something else. But that's what I'm spending on that. Anyway, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is Hardcore Zen, somewhere over there, right? .info/donate, hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. That's my only way of making a living, and I appreciate your support, but as always, you don't have to support me if you don't want to support me. Okay, here is the video about me talking about Primordial Ignorance in Bonn, Germany last year.
So the subject of ignorance is one of those things that comes up in Buddhism quite often. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and what does that mean? There's I think it is Seung San, the Korean Buddhist master, who's most famous for talking about don't know mind. It's I don't think he invented the phrase, but it was his. I think he's passed away now, but it was his way of expressing this idea that ultimately we don't know anything, and it's one of the kind of basic understandings within Buddhism. It's especially strong in the Zen form of Buddhism. And let's see, there's an old story about Bodhidharma, and as I said, I didn't bring any texts here. Let's see if I can remember it. Maybe some of you remember it better than me. But Bodhidharma is invited to go see the Emperor of China, and the Emperor of China is bragging about all of the beautiful stupas and things he's built, these Buddhist monuments, and he says, what kind of merit did I receive for building all of these Buddhist monuments? And Bodhidharma says, none at all. It's a very brave thing to say to the Emperor of China. And let's see, what is the rest of the story? But I know the end of the story. The punchline of the joke is he says, who do you think you are? And he says, I don't know. And ultimately, that's the expression of understanding. We don't know who we are. We think we know who we are. Most of us, I think we know who we are. Somebody says, "Who are you?" We have an answer. We have a name and a birthplace and a personal history. Our taste in music, our favorite movies. Favorite flavor of ice cream, black cherry, our favorite food, Madhur paneer, the Indian peas and cheese, things like that. That's what I am. I'm all of those things. But is that who we are? I'm not sure. There seems to be this great mystery happening right in front of us that we are partaking in, that we kind of ignore, and we kind of bumble our way through our lives, thinking that we know something, and we don't know anything. My teacher was once taking a trip to Israel, and he was getting ready to do this trip, and he said to us, and I wish I could remember exactly the context, but he said to us something like, well, they say I will get on an airplane and I'll travel for some hours, and then I will get out of that airplane and I will be in another country. But I'm not so sure that's what really happens. I thought that was a funny thing, and I always remember that he said that. And I thought, oh, this is a person who has a very different understanding of the world. Because most of us accept things like that. But he didn't accept that the way we see the world and the explanations we have, the most fundamental basic explanations that we have for what goes on in the world, were adequate. And there's a book, some of you who've watched my YouTube channels have probably seen me talk about this book that I thought was quite interesting. Actually, I thought the author is named Donald Hoffman, and I thought there's several interviews on YouTube with different people interviewing Donald Hoffman. And the best one is by this guy named Lex Friedman, but there's several others. And I think almost all of the interviews that Donald Hoffman did about the book are better than the book. Which I hate to say because I write books, and I don't like to say this about somebody who writes books, but I tried to read the book, and I only got about 2/3 of the way through the book. But I thought his interviews were great. The book he's Donald Hoffman, and he's a cognitive scientist, and his book is called The Case Against Reality. And the inspiration for the book was that there was this study of these beetles in Australia who were going in, I think they fixed this, but they were in danger of going extinct because there was a certain kind of beer bottle that the male beetles would try to mate with this beer bottle because for some reason that only the male beetles understood, the beer bottle looked much sexier to them than female beetles. Because something was fooling their senses. So whatever they were looking for that cued them to this is what we should mate with, there was more of it present in the beer bottles than there was in a female beetle. So they would ignore the female beetles and try to mate with the beer bottles. And so they were in danger of going extinct, and they because of this I think they convinced the company that made the beer to change the design of their bottles, and now I think the beetles are okay. But this study led Donald Hoffman to start considering how do we perceive the world? How do we human beings, how do we know that we're seeing the world any better than those beetles? Maybe we're perceiving a lot of things wrongly. Maybe we're also perceiving our world in the wrong way. And this is something that is a very sort of ancient idea in Buddhism. I think in Hinduism as well, but it's especially strong in Buddhism. There's all sorts of ideas. I believe you'd probably find a lot of writings in the Yogacara school of Buddhism that address this problem of beings and primordial ignorance leading us to misperceive reality, to not see reality as it is, but to be fooled by our senses into misperceiving reality, which would lead us to do the wrong things. And probably in our case, in the human case, our tendency to be attracted to things like fame and money and power and things like that would be roughly analogous to those beetles trying to mate with the beer bottles. It's something that doesn't really do us any good, but it attracts us because of the way we're built, and we mistake it for something that we think is going to bring us happiness or be somehow good for us, but it isn't good for us ultimately. It doesn't help us at all. But we chase after it, and we put all our energy into trying to gain, fame and profit. That was the formula. Dogen always called it. But it doesn't help us. But we show it off to each other, and everybody goes, "Oh, look, he's got a lot of those. He's got a Mercedes. It must be wonderful. That must be great." But it doesn't really help. It doesn't really do anything for us. So we're misperceiving the world, and we might be misperceiving the world at a very fundamental level. There may be all sorts of things that are happening all around us that we're not aware of. Let's see if I can remember the old formula. This comes from Yogacara Buddhism. Let's see. Gods perceive water as a string of pearls. Humans perceive it as water. Demons perceive it as pus and blood. Dragons perceive it as a palace. No, fish perceive it as a palace. Anyway, and then Dogen says, is it that there is one thing that is it that there's one real item that we all perceive differently, or is it we misunderstand the different perceptions as being one single object? He says something like that. I told you I didn't bring any of my reference material, so I'm probably getting all the quotations wrong. But he wonders in his writings whether even that formula is correct in its way of presenting it. So this is primordial ignorance. We don't understand. Our perceptions are not reliable. Is one of the basic ideas in Buddhism. That our very perceptions, that seeing is believing is the old phrase in English. There probably is an analogous phrase in German, maybe. And all of our sciences and things are based on perception. We're very into believing science. It's a believe the science is kind of a mantra these days that a lot of people in my country are fond of saying. And I don't want to negate science, because science has been very useful to us and very helpful. It's certainly something we should pay attention to. But to regard it as the ultimate source of knowledge, I think is a big mistake, because it's based on perception. And no matter how good our perceptions are and how well we perceive things and base a system of knowledge on perception, there's a fundamental flaw there that we can't ever get around, which is that the perceptions themselves may not be reliable. They may not be telling us what's actually out there. So what do we do about that? That's the question. That's the big question. Because all of our thoughts are generally based on what we perceive. So we perceive something and then we think about it based on what we perceive. So we have this, we're adding confusion on top of confusion. So we're trying to think about these perceptions we have when the perceptions themselves may not be correct. They may not be a true reflection of what's actually out there. And my teacher's idea, Nishijima Roshi's idea, that he would always say, in which he based in Dogen and some of the classical Buddhist teachers, was that intuition was the thing that was reliable, that there was a kind of an intuitive sense that was more reliable than perception and more reliable than thought. But this intuitive sense is very is slippery. It's not something you can quantify. The way you can quantify your perceptions, you can't measure it. You can't make a chart out of it. You can't count it. You can't do all the kind of things you can do with perceptions when it comes to intuition. It's an instantaneous kind of thing that that's very difficult, and it's also something that's very personal. It's something you kind of can't exactly compare it, although sometimes you can. I think sometimes you can get your intuition in tune with somebody else's intuition. I think that's at its best. That's where the kind of communication one sometimes sees recorded in, for example, the koan stories. I think what we're sometimes seeing when we read the old koan stories is we're listening in to an ancient conversation between some people whose intuitive sense was matching up for a moment, and they were understanding each other on a kind of a deeper intuitive level at that moment. And when you hear the conversation between two people who are having an intuitive experience that's matching each other, it's a bit like listening to lovers talking or something. They speak a language that other people may not quite understand. Although you can understand that they are speaking that language. You might not understand exactly what they're saying, but you can go, they're speaking that language. So it's something like that. It's something where they come together in sync, synchronized, like tuning forks, getting the vibrations together. Yeah, it's something like that. I don't know though.
Hey Ziggy, what do you think of primordial ignorance? Do you feel like it's an issue we should talk about? Or are you just ignorant of primordial ignorance? Anyway, we'll see you later. Bye.
That's close enough.